A single phone call. That's all it took to shatter the walls of invisibility around one woman the world refused to see. In the glittering lobby of the Aurelia Grand Hotel, where every marble tile gleamed like liquid gold, a young black maid named Amara Lewis bent down to polish the floor until her phone buzzed. She shouldn't have answered. The rules were clear, but when she saw the number, her heart froze. It was from the University of Utrecht, the call she had prayed for after 6 failed scholarship attempts. Her trembling fingers swiped the screen, and then, the moment that changed everything. She spoke, in flawless Dutch. Her voice calm, graceful, every word gliding like music through the air. Guests turned, conversations stopped, even the chandelier light seemed to pause. Standing a few feet away, the hotel's billionaire owner, Ethan Caldwell, stared stunned at the maid speaking a language few Americans could even recognize. His eyes didn't see a cleaning uniform anymore. They saw something else, something extraordinary. The next morning, he summoned her to his office. No one knew why. No one could imagine how a single phone call, answered in a forbidden language, would expose a system of lies buried deep within marble walls and launch a revolution that would shake an entire industry. Because Amara Lewis was no ordinary maid. She was a scholar, a linguist, a woman whose brilliance had been ignored for 6 long years, until destiny called her name in Dutch. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you don't belong, this story is for you. What happens next will defy every expectation, every prejudice, and every unspoken rule. Stay with us to the end, because you won't believe what that one phone call set in motion. And if you believe that real talent deserves to be seen, make sure to subscribe to Black Soul Stories now, because stories like this remind us that greatness often begins in silence, waiting for someone brave enough to answer. They called her the Invisible One, not out loud, of course, never to her face, but in a place like the Aurelia Grand Hotel, where crystal chandeliers shimmered like captured constellations and every guest wore success like a tailored suit, people like Amara Lewis existed only in the periphery. At 29, with a degree in linguistics from Columbia University and fluency in 6 languages, she should have been translating for international conferences, not scrubbing their floors. Yet, here she was, bent over a marble tile, her reflection warped by the mop water, listening to the sound of her own breath echo in the emptiness. Around her, the world kept moving. Businessmen barked orders into their phones, heels clattered against polished stone. Laughter drifted from the bar, bright, effortless, belonging to another life. No one saw the woman kneeling in silence. No one asked about her story. They just stepped around her as if stepping over possibility itself. Every morning, she told herself it was temporary. Every night, she whispered that same lie. 6 years of job applications, interviews ending with polite smiles and colder rejections, each one leaving her a little more faded, a little more forgotten. Maybe, she thought as she wrung the mop, some dreams are only meant for others. But deep down, a flame still burned, small, stubborn, unyielding. She could still hear her mother's voice. Never let the world decide your worth. Then it happened. Her phone buzzed. The vibration was soft, but in the hush of the grand lobby, it might as well have been thunder. She froze, heart pounding. She wasn't supposed to answer. Rule number 1, no personal calls during work hours. Linda Graham, the floor manager, had drilled it into everyone, but the name flashing on the screen made her breath catch. University of Utrecht. Her chest tightened. After 6 failed attempts at a scholarship, could this be? She looked around. The lobby was nearly empty. A few guests lingered near the elevators. A bellhop rolled by with a golden cart. No one would notice, she told herself. Just one moment. She slipped behind a marble column and whispered, "Hello, this is Amara Lewis." The voice on the other end spoke in Dutch, clear, melodic, unmistakable. "Miss Lewis, we've reviewed your file again." Before she could think, Amara replied in perfect Dutch. Her words flowed like silk, effortless, confident, alive. Years of study and silence poured out of her like second nature. "Thank you, Professor," she said softly. "I was worried my letter of intent hadn't arrived." For the first time in years, her voice didn't tremble. It danced. Each syllable shimmered with grace, filling the space around her with quiet power. It was as if, for a moment, the world had stopped pretending not to hear her. Then, silence. She felt it before she saw it. The air shifted. The hum of the lobby stilled. Slowly, she turned. A man stood just a few feet away, tall, composed, eyes sharp as stormlight. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire, owner of the Aurelia chain, a man whose signature could change lives. And beside him, Linda Graham, her face twisting with fury. Amara's pulse roared in her ears. She murmured a quick apology in Dutch, hung up, and stood frozen. Caldwell's gaze didn't waver. There was curiosity there, and something else, recognition. Lewis, Linda's voice sliced through the air like glass. My office, now. The words cracked across the silence, echoing through the grand hall. Heads turned, and just like that, the invisible maid was visible at last. The walk to the basement felt longer than it ever had before. Every step down the narrow stairwell echoed off the concrete walls, the dim bulbs flickering overhead like tired eyes. The scent of bleach hung heavy in the air, sharp and sterile, as if trying to scrub away the truth of what was about to happen. Linda Graham stood waiting by the door, arms crossed, lips pursed so tightly they turned white. Her heels clicked against the linoleum with military precision. Do you have any idea how unprofessional you looked? She snapped before Amara could even open her mouth. Chatting away in some foreign language, Dutch, was it, in the middle of the lobby, in front of guests? Amara started to explain, her voice calm but small. It was the university, Miss Graham. Linda cut her off. I don't care who it was. You embarrassed this hotel. You embarrassed me. We hire staff to clean, not to perform language lessons for the guests. The words hit like slaps, each one louder than the last. I'm sorry, Amara said quietly, keeping her eyes lowered. It won't happen again. But apologies meant nothing here. Linda wasn't listening. She was performing for the invisible hierarchy that ruled every marble corridor. You're lucky Mr. Caldwell didn't fire you on the spot, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. From now on, you'll be assigned to the convention center restrooms, deep cleaning, after events, every night. The basement air seemed to thin around her. Everyone in the department knew what that meant. Double shifts, no overtime, endless scrubbing after hundreds of guests. It was punishment disguised as duty. Linda straightened her blazer, a faint smirk forming. Maybe down there, you can practice as many languages as you want. Nobody will hear you. For a long moment, Amara said nothing. Her throat burned, but she refused to let her voice tremble. She nodded, gathered her supplies, and turned away. Behind her, Linda's voice followed, sharp and final. Be grateful you still have a job. The heavy door closed, sealing the words in the darkness. As Amara made her way down the final hallway, the lights flickered again, scattering thin shadows across the walls. It felt like the building itself was watching, like every creak and hum was whispering a warning. Know your place. But inside, something resisted, a quiet strength, the same one that had carried her through 6 years of rejection. She could almost hear her mother's voice, soft but steady. Don't let them make you forget who you are. That night, back in her small apartment on the edge of the city, Amara sat in silence. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old wood. Her roommates, 2 nurses working night shifts, had already left, leaving only the distant hum of traffic outside the window. She looked around at the peeling paint, at the bookshelf sagging under secondhand grammar texts and dictionaries she could no longer afford to update. On the cracked wall above her bed hung her degree from Columbia, framed but yellowing around the edges. She stared at it for a long time. 6 years of late-night study sessions, of dreams whispered between coffee and exhaustion. 6 years of promises that hard work would be enough. And now, that same degree looked back at her like a stranger. A tear slipped down her cheek, followed by another. But it wasn't fear that filled her, it was fatigue, the slow erosion of belief. She pressed her hand over her heart and whispered, almost to herself, "Don't let them take this from you." Outside, the city lights flickered through the blinds, distant, unreachable. And down in the bowels of the Aurelia Grand, a woman with 6 languages and 1 fading dream prepared to face another day. They called her at the front desk just after sunrise, when the lobby still smelled faintly of lemon polish and last night's perfume. The phone rang once, twice, and the head receptionist lifted her eyes to find Amara passing by with a supply cart. HR wants you, immediately. No explanation, no tone of comfort. Just a sentence that felt like a summons. Amara's fingers tightened around the card handle. HR was on a floor she had only seen in elevator reflections and hallway maps up near the executive suites where the air seemed thinner, where decisions were made behind glass. Housekeeping never went there, not unless something was ending. She wiped her palms on her apron and stepped into the service elevator, then hesitated. Not that one. They had told her to take the main lift. It was a small detail, but it changed the temperature in her chest. She crossed the lobby, pressed the gleaming button, and watched the doors slide open like a stage curtain. Inside, two men in sharp suits spoke in low, clipped tones. "If we close the Amsterdam deal, we hit 9 figures," one said. "Legal wants the deliverables in Mandarin and Dutch by Thursday," the other replied. Their reflections multiplied in the mirrored walls. Their voices ricocheted. Neither of them looked at her. She could have been smoke. She could have been air. The elevator rose past mezzanine, past ballrooms, past the safe floors where she belonged. Her ears popped. Her heart tried to match the drumbeat of the ascending numbers. A lifetime of rules told her to step out, to apologize, to go back to the basement where people like her kept the wheels turning but never touched the controls. And yet she stayed, caught between dread and a current of impossible hope. When the doors opened, the carpet changed. The pile was deeper, softer, swallowing sound. Sunlight fell in long white stripes across a corridor lined with modern art. The sign read, "Human Resources, Operations, Executive," words like Gates. She walked past framed awards and charity gala photos, past a wall-sized map of the chain's global properties. A receptionist glanced up with practiced neutrality. "Miss Lewis? This way." The HR director met her at the threshold, posture precise, voice careful. "Mr. Caldwell would like to see you." She blinked. The name landed like a verdict. Ethan Caldwell did not meet with housekeepers. He met with investors, governments, boards. But the director was already moving, so Amara followed past one glass wall, then another, until they reached a door of dark wood and quiet weight. The office beyond was larger than her entire apartment 3 times over. Windows rose from floor to ceiling, framing the skyline like a painting. A long table held leather-bound portfolios. On the far wall, a row of photographs traced the evolution of the Aurelia brand from a single historic property to an empire of light and chrome. He stood by the window at first, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city wake. When he turned, he did not smile. He studied her the way a pilot reads weather carefully, precisely, searching for the currents beneath the surface. On his desk lay a thin folder with her name. "Miss Lewis," he said, voice even. "Please, sit." She did. Her spine was straight, her hands folded in her lap. In this room, posture felt like language. He opened the folder. Pages whispered. "You speak Dutch," he began, eyes flicking from paper to face. "French, Italian, Mandarin, Japanese, Spanish." Amara nodded once. "Yes, sir." He looked up and held her gaze, as if testing for truth. "And you graduated from Columbia. Honors, linguistics." "Yes." Silence opened between them clean, unblinking. He closed the folder gently, then leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Tell me why someone like you is scrubbing floors in my hotel." Her pulse thudded. She had rehearsed answers for years, small, acceptable answers, but the question stripped those away. She inhaled, slow and steady. "I applied for 47 positions," she said. "In guest relations, translations, international services, I requested 12 internal transfers. Every time, I was told there were no openings, or that someone else was a better fit." Caldwell's face did not change. "By whom?" "Linda Graham," she said, "and Martin Doyle in operations." He wrote the names down without comment. The pen moved with surgical calm. Outside, a gull cut across the sunlight and was gone. He tapped the closed folder once, like a judge acknowledging evidence. Then he stood, walked to a credenza, and poured water into a glass. "Drink," he said, offering it to her. It wasn't a kindness so much as a calibration, a way to see how she carried her hands, where her breath lived, whether fear ruled her. She lifted the glass without shaking. He returned to his chair. "Tomorrow we host a trade conference with Dutch and Chinese delegates," he said. "We will negotiate terms that could define our expansion for the next decade. I need someone who navigates language and culture with precision. Not just words, nuance." She listened, waiting for the part where he would ask her to prepare rooms, to polish silver, to remain useful and unseen. Instead, he said, "I want to test you." A single heartbeat passed. "In what capacity, sir?" "As our interim international relations coordinator for the event." He didn't soften the title. He let it sit in the air, heavy as a key placed in an open palm. Access to systems, full clearance for delegate materials. You will liaise with both Dutch and Chinese teams. The room seemed to tilt, just slightly, not from shock, but from the weight of a door creaking open in a hallway she had never been allowed to walk. I understand the rules you've been asked to live by, Caldwell said, eyes steady on hers. Consider them suspended. She absorbed the words like a body, starved of heat. Beneath the table, her fingers pressed lightly together, grounding, translating breath into steadiness. Can you do this? He asked. Amara didn't look at the folder. She didn't glance at the skyline. She met his eyes. Yes, sir. He nodded once. Decision made. Wind shifting. HR will finalize the paperwork. IT will issue your credentials within the hour. He slid the folder toward her. You will report to me directly until the conference concludes. She rose. Thank you. The words were simple, but inside them lived 6 years of silence, 6 years of grit. As she turned for the door, he added, almost as an afterthought that was not an afterthought at all. One more thing. If Linda Graham or Martin Doyle impedes your work, you come straight back here. Amara paused. Not from fear, from recognition. The floor was not tilting. It was lifting. Understood, she said. When she stepped back into the corridor, the carpet felt different under her shoes. The air seemed brighter, the sunlight more deliberate. In the elevator, two executives continued their conversation about million-dollar contracts, about deliverables and deadlines. Still not seeing her. It didn't matter. For the first time since she had put on the uniform, the numbers above the doors rose and did not feel like a ceiling. They felt like a countdown. They fitted her with a new badge first. The plastic rectangle felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried its own gravity. Access level updated. Systems granted. A small photo of Amara Lewis looked back at her, no longer labeled housekeeping, but interim international relations coordinator. The title didn't echo. It rang. In the mirror of the HR conference room, she adjusted the blazer they'd given her from the corporate wardrobe, charcoal, crisp lines, sleeves just right. She smoothed the lapel with steady fingers and caught the change on her face. Not a transformation, exactly. More like recognition. The light streaming through the window sharpened everything. The edges of the skyline, the sheen of her hair pulled back into a neat twist, the quiet strength in her eyes. Caldwell laid it out without theatrics. Your compensation for the duration is $5,000 a week, he said, as if discussing postage. Deliverables are immediate. Dutch and Mandarin first, then French and Italian as needed. You will coordinate with operations, legal, and events. He slid a stack of credentials toward her. Security clearances, system logins. Do not share them with anyone. For a heartbeat, the number punched air from her lungs. 5,000 in a week. 3 months' pay condensed into 7 days. The floor did not tilt this time. It steadied. She let the shock pass through her and anchored in the task. Understood, she said. Her voice was even, almost restrained, but inside it carried a promise she made to herself long before she ever set foot in this building. Caldwell watched that steadiness, measuring it, then nodded. You start now. On the way back to HR to finalize paperwork, she stepped into the corridor where everything glowed with the static of power, phones buzzing, doors opening and closing with soft seals, assistants moving like choreography. She was almost at the corner when Linda Graham appeared, the color draining from her face, as if someone had pulled a plug. What are you doing up here? Linda demanded, voice too sharp for this floor. Her eyes dropped to the badge and snapped back to Amara's face. Where did you get that? Working, Amara said. Calm, precise. At Mr. Caldwell's request. Linda's mouth opened, then closed. You don't have the qualifications. Dutch, Mandarin, French, Italian, Spanish, Japanese. Amara replied, as if reciting a time zone list. Columbia University, honors. 6 years in this building, 12 transfer requests, 47 applications. For a moment, silence pressed in. Linda recovered with a brittle smile. Don't get comfortable. These things change. Not as quickly as you think, Amara said, and stepped past. It wasn't a threat. It was a line in the air, a boundary finally spoken. HR smelled like paper and toner and coffee. The hum of printers stitched the room together, while through the glass walls, the city flared with mid-morning glare. Clara Bennett stood to greet her, a folder already in hand, eyes bright with the kind of focus Amara recognized from lecture halls and labs. I am so glad you're here, Clara said, shaking her hand with a sincerity that felt startling in this building. I read your file when I joined 3 months ago. I couldn't understand why you were in housekeeping. She lowered her voice. I tried to ask. Doors closed. Amara held her gaze, seeing not pity but respect. Thank you, she said, for trying. Clara nodded toward the chair. Sign here, here, and initial by the confidentiality clause. You'll have full portal access within 30 minutes. I preloaded your profile with language modules and event briefs. If anyone gives you trouble, come to me directly, but also go to Caldwell. He wants no bottlenecks. The pages were dense but familiar. NDAs, scope of work, emergency protocols. Amara's pen moved with clean strokes. Clara slid over a slim, black notebook and a set of coded lanyards. You'll need these for back of house during the gala transitions, she said, and this is your direct line. She wrote her number on the first page. Use it. Amara exhaled, tension she hadn't realized she was holding loosening by degrees. Thoughtfulness layered on logistics, competence meeting opportunity. She felt the engine of the hotel from this angle, the way decisions rippled outward like tides. By the way, Clara added, almost conspiratorial, I heard about the call, Dutch in the lobby. You should know you startled half of executive, but you also woke them up. A small smile tugged at the corner of Amara's mouth. I didn't mean to make a scene. Sometimes the truth sounds like one, Clara said, especially when no one's heard it in a while. They reviewed the delegate matrix, arrival times, dietary considerations, cultural notes, last-minute translation requests that needed triaging. Amara skimmed the Mandarin briefing and flagged honorifics that would read too casual in a corporate context. In the Dutch packet, she circled a phrase that would land as transactional when the intent was partnership. She annotated margins quickly, the way she used to mark her own papers before a defense. Your eye is fast, Clara said. Practice, Amara replied. And a few years of being ignored. They both let the line sit, not as bitterness, but as fact, like weather, like gravity. Then Clara straightened, switching gears. You'll meet operations at noon, legal at 12:45, events at 1, Caldwell at 1:30 to review your revisions. Amara nodded. The schedule wrote itself into her bones like choreography she had always known. She stood to leave, and Clara touched her elbow lightly. One more thing, she said. You are not alone in this. It caught Amara off guard, that simple declaration. Not flattery, alignment. She tucked the notebook into her blazer, felt the weight of the badge against her collarbone, and stepped back into the hallway. The hotel looked different now. Not shinier, not grander, just clearer. She noticed the pace of assistants sinking across departments, the quiet way doors opened when you carried authority, the way eye contact changed when your name lived in the system. The fluorescent blue of her old time card flickered through memory and disappeared. In the elevator, she was joined by a banquet captain and a tech lead debating uplight temperatures for the evening reception. We need a cooler tone for the Dutch delegation, the tech said. They prefer clean light. The captain nodded. And warmer for the Chinese dinner, gold, not amber. Details, respect disguised as design. Language translated into light. By the time she reached the lobby, the marble floor no longer felt like a mirror that warped her into someone smaller. It felt like a runway. She crossed it without apology, a quiet current of purpose guiding her stride. At the edge of her vision, a few familiar faces from housekeeping watched, with a mix of surprise and something fiercer hope that dared to lift its head. At the service corridor, she paused, pressing a palm to the cool wall for half a second, grounding herself in the sensation of stone, of structure. Then she moved on, toward a makeshift war room where binders stacked like city blocks and screens mapped the rhythm of the day. She set her notebook down, rolled up her sleeves, and began. New world, same woman. Only now, the doors were open, and the language she spoke was finally the one this building had to hear. They gave her a corner of the operations war room and a stack of binders as dense as law books. Screens glowed with itineraries, seating charts, menu notes, and translation packets color-coded by language. Amara rolled her sleeves and began at the place where meaning lives, the words. She started with the Mandarin deck for the opening plenary. On page 1, a welcome line meant to read warm and ceremonial came off as casual and thin. The translator had used the everyday form of address, the equivalent of "hey there," when the room would be filled with chairpersons and senior ministers. In the bullet points below, an idiom that should suggest partnership had been flattened into a phrase that implied transaction, as if the hotel were buying compliance rather than building trust. Farther down, a tonal slip turned a respectful verb into a term that, in certain contexts, could register as scolding. To an untrained ear, it was invisible. To a senior Chinese delegate, it would sting. Her pencil moved in quick strokes, replaced the greeting with the formal honorific, switched the pronoun ni to nin throughout when addressing the principals, strengthened the courtesy formula. We are honored becomes it is our privilege, framed in the collective voice. Adjust the partnership line. Not we seek to use your network, but we hope to cultivate long-term collaboration. She circled a phrase where the fourth tone flattened what should have risen gently, leaving a trace of impatience in the text. In a language where tone is meaning, that shift is not cosmetic, she wrote. It is character. In corporate Mandarin, the wrong tone is not an accent. It is a mistake. She moved to the contract appendix. The heading for arbitration protocols used a term common in street speech, not in corporate statute. She crossed it out and replaced it with the proper legal diction, then added a note in the margin. This reads like a blog, not a boardroom. In the cultural considerations sheet, the translator had recommended a toast phrase that, standing alone, would sound like a kabuki of goodwill, but paired with the wrong glassware, could feel theatrical rather than sincere. She added a footnote: use stemmed glasses for the first toast, switch to tea for the second. Respect arrives in details. Caldwell stepped into the doorway without announcing himself. He watched the cadence of her hand, the economy of her edits, the way every mark seemed to land where intention had fallen short. He did not interrupt. When she finished the page, she looked up. These are not just typos, she said. They are tonal misreads. The translator chose speed over register, everyday words in places that require ceremony, flattened honorifics, and in a few lines, the tone marks are wrong. In Chinese, that is not a matter of style. It is a question of face. He came closer, the city's brightness cutting a clean line across the table. Doyle told me we hired the best, he said. It cost a fortune. She lifted the top page to show the repetition. The same missteps threaded through the executive bios, the panel introductions, the gift inscription. Whoever did this knows basic grammar, but not corporate etiquette. And they do not hear the tones. In Mandarin, using ni instead of nin to a chairwoman is like calling a judge, hey you. You would not do it on a good day. You do not do it in front of a camera. His gaze sharpened. How sure are you? Sure, she said simply. Then, gentler. He did not hire the best. He hired someone close. Caldwell said nothing. The quiet thickened, not with discomfort, but with a recalibration of facts. He set his palm on the table and leaned, tracking her notes across the page. Show me the fixes. She walked him through the revisions, the way a conductor marks a score. Here, elevate the salutation and pair it with the correct title sequence. Here, shift the verb from take to host, because hospitality is not a transaction, it is a posture. Here, replace a phrase that reads aggressive in Chinese with one that preserves firmness without sounding like a demand. She flagged an anecdote shoehorned into a speech. In a Western room, it might land as charming. In this one, it would read as careless timekeeping. Move it to the private dinner. Let the toast carry elegance instead of wit. He listened without defensiveness, which is a kind of intelligence. Then he asked, what else? She opened the Dutch packet, scanned a paragraph, and stopped. The document used a literal translation of a partnership term that would play as mercantile rather than mutual. She softened it, then added a note. Dutch business culture respects directness, but not crudeness. Replace language that suggests leverage with language that signals balance. In the schedule, a line marked buffer, wrist implying disorganization, recast it as courtesy window. Words are weather. They set the barometric pressure of the room before anyone speaks. She pulled the next binder. The errors repeated like fingerprints, misapplied honorifics, tone-insensitive phrasing, legal language that drifted too casual, the same idiom misused in 3 separate documents. She felt the pattern crystallize in her hand. This was not a single weak deliverable. It was a template, reproduced across decks as if someone had copied a master file and changed only the dates. She flipped to the back and checked the metadata. Vendor name, timestamp, upload ID. The footer logo was crisp but generic. She noted the initials in the revision trail. The same pair reappeared on Dutch and Mandarin files. She recognized one from an invoice she had once routed to accounts while covering for a sick colleague. It carried a surname she had heard in operations meetings. She wrote it down, not as accusation, but as alignment of facts. When she looked up, Caldwell was still watching her, not with impatience, but with a kind of attention that learns. "This is more than cleanup," he said. "It is," she replied. "It is a through line. And if the wrong person delivers the wrong tone to the wrong audience, we do not just risk offense, we risk losing contracts, relationships, reputation." He nodded once. "Keep going." She did. She tightened the invitation language so that every RSVP felt like a gesture of respect instead of a compliance request. She reworked panel questions to avoid idioms that would die in translation. She scripted a bilingual welcome that would allow the Dutch delegates to hear precision and the Chinese delegates to feel ceremony without losing pace. Between edits, her notes multiplied. Check vendor credentials, cross-reference with operations approvals, audit past event decks for the same signature errors. By the time she closed the last binder, the table bore a clean architecture of corrections and a quiet map of where the story would lead next. She placed the pencil down, not with triumph, but with the calm of a surgeon who has stopped the bleeding and is already thinking about the cause. Caldwell gathered the corrected pages, his thumb tracing the neat line of her notations. For a moment, the war room noise fell away. Then he said what smart leaders say when the ground has shifted, even slightly. "Thank you. Now let us find out who thought this was good enough." The conference unfolded like a living organism, every heartbeat synchronized, every conversation a delicate balance of culture and commerce. Amara stood at the center of it all, a quiet force, commanding 3 languages as easily as breathing. In the morning session, she welcomed the Dutch delegation in their native tongue, her vowels clean, her rhythm effortless. By noon, she was switching to Mandarin, guiding introductions between executives who had never shared a table before. When tensions flared over contract clauses and translation ambiguities, she bridged the gap with grace, reframing misunderstandings before they could harden into insult. Every time she spoke, the room leaned closer. Caldwell watched from the periphery, arms folded, expression unreadable. He had seen competence before. He had never seen this. Every phrase she shaped, every gesture of deference and clarity, carried the weight of understanding, built not from textbooks, but from experience. It wasn't just skill, it was presence. And yet, under his admiration, a current of anger moved anger at the quiet machinery that had buried this brilliance for 6 years beneath linen carts and bleach. By the afternoon, word had spread. Delegates asked for her by name. A Dutch executive, gray hair, steel cufflinks, paused mid-conversation, eyes narrowing as recognition flickered. "Forgive me," he said, switching languages. "Are you the scholar who published that paper on multilingual strategy and cross-border negotiations? Journal of Applied Linguistics, 4 years ago?" For a moment, Amara blinked, caught between worlds. "Yes," she admitted, "that was my work." He broke into a smile. "I cited it twice. Brilliant analysis. I never expected to meet the author here." His voice rose slightly, drawing attention. A few nearby delegates turned. Caldwell caught the exchange, the praise washing across the table like a slow tide. He turned his gaze toward operations, where Doyle lingered. Near the back, his forced smile tight enough to crack enamel. Across the room, Linda Graham's composure began to fray. She busied herself with non-existent tasks, eyes darting toward Caldwell and back to Amara. Every success the younger woman racked up felt like another crack in the polished facade they had built a structure of control, favoritism, and quiet exclusion. Then, as Amara prepared the final handouts for the evening session, she noticed something. A young assistant, nervous, uncertain, approached the delegates with a folder marked Final Translation, Mandarin Master Contract. Amara's pulse sharpened. She recognized the surname on the badge, Whitaker, Doyle's niece, and the cover page. She knew it. It was the flawed version, the one she had corrected days earlier. The same errors, the same tonal missteps, now resurrected and slipped into circulation as the official draft. She stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, where did you get these materials?" The young woman stammered, clutching the folder. "Mr. Doyle told me to use the version in the shared drive. He said yours wasn't final yet." Amara's eyes flicked to the corner watermark old timestamp. No revision ID. She snapped a quick photo on her phone, every instinct now trained for evidence. Her breath steadied, her mind already assembling the pattern. The same flawed file used across departments, protected by the same network of approvals. This wasn't negligence. It was orchestration. Within minutes, she was in Caldwell's office, the door closing softly behind her. "They replaced my corrections," she said, laying the printed pages side by side, the proper translation and the counterfeit. "This version," she pointed, "is the one your delegates just received. The same tone errors, the same offensive phrasing. It was deliberately swapped." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "By whom?" "Doyle's niece delivered it," she said. "He's been funneling all translation contracts through her company. Look at the metadata, same initials, same submission trail." Before he could answer, the door burst open. Clara Bennett entered, her face pale but resolute, a folder clutched in both hands. "Sir, you need to see this." She laid out pages of hiring data, charts, and audit notes. "I've been combing through internal records for months. There's a consistent pattern, 5 years of systematic rejection. Highly qualified minority candidates, especially black women, filtered out during secondary reviews. The denials all trace back to operations." Caldwell flipped through the papers, his expression turning from disbelief to cold fury. "How many?" Clara's voice barely wavered. "Dozens, maybe more." And every time someone like Amara applied for a transfer, the file was rerouted through the same chain Doyle's desk. Graham's sign-off. Amara stood silent, her breath slow but steady. The truth was no longer abstract. It had a face, a ledger, a signature. Caldwell straightened, his tone quiet but lethal. "Enough." He closed the folder with finality. "I've seen what I need to see." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the hum of the conference carried on, voices mingling, deals forming, oblivious to the reckoning gathering above them. Caldwell's gaze shifted from Clara to Amara, then to the skyline beyond the glass. His voice dropped to a register that carried more weight than volume. "They built this system to bury people like you," he said, "to hide brilliance under obedience. That ends today." He turned back to the desk, his pen poised over a blank sheet. "Call security. Prepare the audit reports. I want every department head in the executive hall by 5. Doyle, Graham, all of them." He looked up once more, eyes locked on Amara. "You've done your part. Now they'll face theirs." And as she stepped from the office, down the long corridor, of polished glass and muted light, Amara felt the shift, the tremor that runs through a building when its foundations begin to crack. The confrontation began behind a closed door. Caldwell's office, once a sanctuary of composure, now pulsed with the energy of a storm about to break. The blinds were half drawn, slicing daylight into sharp lines across the table where a stack of documents lay, contracts, invoices, metadata printouts, all marked by the same initials. Thomas Doyle stood across from Caldwell, his face pale but defiant, the corners of his mouth twitching between arrogance and fear. "I don't know what kind of witch hunt this is," he started, voice tight, "but I've been running operations in this company for 15 years. You think I'd risk my career over a few?" "Stop talking," Caldwell said. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command. "You'll want to see this." He gestured to Amara, standing quietly beside the desk, her phone in one hand, a folder in the other. Her voice was steady. "This is an email thread between Mr. Doyle and his niece, dated 3 months ago, approving a $50,000 translation contract for the same project I corrected this week." She slid a printed copy forward. "Market value for comparable services is under $20,000. Doyle's jaw tightened. "Those emails could be fabricated." Amara didn't flinch. "Except they're not. They're archived on the internal server, and every transfer matches the payment trail." She opened the next page. "Here your niece submitting invoices, and here her credentials, supposedly verified by Peking University." Caldwell's voice cut in, cold and even. "We called the registrar this morning. No record of certification. The degree she claimed doesn't exist." Doyle's breath hitched, his composure cracking. "You can't. You don't have the authority. I own this company," Caldwell said, leaning forward, his eyes burning through the pretense. "I have every authority." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Doyle snapped, his voice rising, brittle and desperate. "This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of a janitor over me? She's nothing. She's..." "Enough," Caldwell warned. But Doyle wasn't listening anymore. He turned on Amara, fury spilling past fear. "You're a cleaning lady, that's all you are. Don't pretend you belong in this room." The words cracked across the space like a slap. Amara straightened, unblinking. Her reply was calm, measured, precise. Dr. Amara Lewis, Ph.D. in Applied Linguistics, Columbia University. She let the title hang between them, unchallenged. And I belong here more than you ever did. Caldwell didn't look at Doyle again. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Call an emergency assembly," he ordered. "Executive and department heads, now." Within an hour, the main auditorium filled. Rows of managers, supervisors, and staff filed in, murmurs rippling like a current beneath the vaulted ceiling. On the stage, a massive screen glowed with the Aurelia Grand emblem, now overshadowed by the weight of what was about to unfold. Caldwell stepped to the podium. His expression was carved from granite. "What you're about to hear," he began, "will change how we do business forever." The crowd hushed. "For years," he continued, "we have celebrated growth, success, expansion. But behind the marble and glass, something else was growing a quiet rot. We've allowed favoritism and bias to bury talent. We've rewarded connections instead of competence." He gestured to the screen. Charts appeared, graphs of hiring trends, transfer approvals, and racial demographics. The data was unmistakable. Qualified applicants rejected, internal promotions denied. The pattern painted itself in cruel precision. "And today," Caldwell said, voice hardening, "that ends." He nodded toward Amara, who stepped forward, placing a small recorder on the podium. "This," she said, "contains every conversation, every instruction, every thread I received while uncovering this pattern. It includes Mr. Doyle's directives to his niece and his remarks to subordinates about keeping certain people in their place." Gasps rippled through the audience. Doyle shifted in his seat, the blood draining from his face. Caldwell's gaze swept the room. "Thomas Doyle, you are hereby terminated for cause fraud, discrimination, and conduct unbecoming of this organization." Security approached. Doyle stood, sputtering. "You'll regret this. You don't understand." But his voice was swallowed by the sound of footsteps escorting him out. Caldwell turned to the front row. "Linda Graham," he said, "is suspended pending investigation into her involvement in this misconduct." Linda's breath caught, her hand tightening on the armrest. "Sir, Enough," he said simply. "We will find the truth." Then his tone shifted. He looked out over the hall, at the faces of employees who had spent years unseen. "We cannot change what we ignored, but we can decide who we become." Behind him, the screen changed again. New charts appeared, metrics of skill, education, languages spoken. At the top of one graph, a name gleamed. "Today," he announced, "we correct a mistake 6 years in the making. Dr. Amara Lewis, who began here as a member of our cleaning staff, will now serve as our Global Director of Communications and Multilingual Relations." The room erupted. Applause crashed against the walls, rolling like thunder. Some clapped tentatively at first, others with abandon. In the back row, a housekeeper raised her hand to her mouth, tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. Amara stood still as the sound rose, her chest tight, her eyes scanning the faces, some shocked, some joyful, some simply relieved to see justice not as a word, but as an act. Caldwell turned to her. "The stage is yours," he said quietly. She stepped forward, the lights warm on her face, the echo still trembling. When she spoke, her voice carried not just across the room, but into every silence that had ever told her she didn't belong. And in that moment, the building that once buried her brilliance finally echoed with the sound of her becoming. 6 months later, the skyline outside Amara's office shimmered like a promise finally kept. The brass nameplate on the door read, "Dr. Amara Lewis, Vice President of Diversity and International Relations." Her office sat high above the city, walls of glass framing a horizon once unreachable. She stood there for a long moment each morning, not out of vanity, but remembrance. The woman who once scrubbed those marble floors could now see beyond them. What began as one act of courage had become a quiet revolution. Under her leadership, the Aurelia Grand launched a program called Hidden Brilliance, an initiative designed to identify overlooked talent across every department. The concept was simple but radical. Every employee's skills would be reviewed not by title, but by capability. Janitors, receptionists, kitchen staff, anyone with hidden credentials or experience would be considered for advancement. The results stunned even the board. In just 6 months, 147 employees were promoted into roles that matched their true potential. 83% came from minority backgrounds. People who had been invisible were now leading projects, managing teams, speaking at conferences. The hallways of the Aurelia Grand no longer echoed with hierarchy, they hummed with possibility. And word spread. Other hotel chains called, asking for guidance. Articles appeared in business journals praising Aurelia's turnaround as the blueprint for ethical leadership in modern hospitality. But for Amara, none of it was about prestige. It was about balance, restoring the dignity that should never have been lost. Not everyone rose. Justice carried its own ledger. Linda Graham, once the floor manager who barked orders from behind a clipboard, now managed the laundry facility at a small sister property. Each day, she folded linens under the same fluorescent lights that had once reflected off Amara's mop bucket. She worked quietly, without defiance, the lesson etched deeper than reprimand could ever carve. As for Thomas Doyle, no luxury chain would touch him. The scandal of falsified contracts and discriminatory hiring had followed him like a shadow. Rumor placed him at a roadside motel outside Phoenix, overseeing night shifts and empty parking lots. Power gone, reputation erased. His niece had been ordered to return every inflated payment and attend an ethics training program. But fate, it seemed, still had a sense of symmetry. The scholarship that now funded her Mandarin studies came from the Amara Lewis Foundation, a fund created to support underprivileged students pursuing careers in language and cultural studies. In an irony, almost poetic, she now studied the very discipline her uncle once exploited. At the company's annual summit, the auditorium was full again. This time, the atmosphere was different. No tension, no fear, just anticipation. The stage lights cast a soft gold over Amara as she stepped forward to speak. "When I first came to this company," she began, "I believed talent spoke for itself. That hard work would be enough. But talent cannot shine where no one's looking. Opportunity is not found, it's given." She paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. "The strength of a company isn't measured by its profits or its skyline. It's measured by how it frees the brilliance within its people. True power lies in the courage to see beyond uniforms, beyond accents, beyond assumptions, and to ask, what if the person we've overlooked is the one who could change everything?" Her words hung in the air like a benediction. Around the room, faces glistened. Executives who once ignored, janitors who once shrank into corners, managers newly promoted, all stood together, bound not by hierarchy but by recognition. Then came the applause. It rose like a tide, not in a burst, but wave by wave, soft, then steady, then roaring. Somewhere near the back, an older housekeeper pressed her apron to her face, tears spilling freely. She had seen Amara scrub floors once. Now, she watched her rewrite the rules. As the applause echoed, Amara looked out over the crowd and smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. Justice had not only been served, it had been shared. And if this story makes you believe that fairness still matters, that light can reach even the lowest corners, then let your voice be heard. Tap the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and remind the world that every unseen hand might hold extraordinary power. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to stay invisible for everyone else to finally see. The city stretched beneath her like a constellation come alive Chicago, glowing against the night. Every light a heartbeat, every street a reminder of how far she had come. In the quiet of her corner office, Amara stood by the window, her reflection merging with the skyline. 6 years ago, she had stared at her own reflection in a mop bucket. Tonight, it looked back from 32 stories high. On her desk, an envelope waited. The return address read, University of Utrecht, Netherlands. She opened it carefully, fingertips brushing the fine paper. Inside was a letter, formal, yet warm. Professor Vanderhout wrote of her rise, of how her work had inspired a new program on applied linguistics and workplace equity. He invited her to serve as a visiting lecturer, to share her story with students who dreamed of changing systems from within. For a moment, she laughed softly to herself. "If they hadn't sent me to clean that basement," she whispered, "maybe I'd still be mopping floors." The irony was gentle, not bitter. Every act meant to silence her had instead amplified her voice. Every door closed had become a reason to build her own. She sat at her desk and looked at the scholarship forms waiting for signature. The Amara Lewis Foundation grant, created to fund education for employees' children. On top of the list was a name she recognized, the daughter of a former janitor who once worked beside her. That little girl wanted to study hospitality management. Amara smiled. The cycle was no longer broken. It was rewritten. Outside, snow began to fall, light, silent, infinite. It caught the glow of the street lamps, turning the city into something softer, almost sacred. And in that hush, her mother's voice came back, as clear as if she were standing beside her. Never let the world decide your worth. Amara closed her eyes. She finally understood. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about light, about bringing what had been buried into sight and giving every unseen hand a chance to reach upward, because talent exists everywhere. Genius hides in uniforms, in quiet hallways, in people who were told they'd never be more. All it takes is one person willing to see them, one act of courage that says, "You belong here too." The story of Amara Lewis reminds us that justice is not only the exposure of wrongs, it is the planting of hope, the steady work of making room for every seed to grow. Her journey began with a phone call in Dutch, but it became something far larger, a reminder that greatness doesn't rise from privilege, but from persistence. If this story moved you, if it made you believe that fairness still has a place in the world, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let us know what justice means to you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real stories of resilience, of people who turn darkness into dawn, tap like and subscribe to Black Soul Stories. Because somewhere tonight, another voice is waiting to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, the next story we tell will be yours.